All right, this is the Phet density class activity. So the purpose of this activity is to figure out why some objects sink and some objects float. So each section is designed to understand density in a different way. So follow the instructions in each section. You can see here, I did provide the link here, and this is also a good video that shows what density is. And also, I did post this video up here. You don't have the link here because I'm making the video now. Now over here, you have the equations for density if you ever need to calculate it, which you will. All right, so the first thing you do is when you open the simulation, we're going to click on that intro box, right? So I'll go ahead and shrink my screen so we can see that. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to mess around with this wooden block here. You can see here you can move it around. Can't move it past that. Now it says increase the mass of the wood block. What happens to the volume and what happens to the density of the wood block? So if I increase the mass, you can see here, well, the volume goes up. But notice the density is up here, right? The density is up here. So the density doesn't change. So the volume, well, the volume goes up, right? The density, well, it remains the same. So you have to get both of those correct. Increase the volume of the wood block. And what happens to the mass, right? So increase or decrease, right? So as I increase the volume, the mass goes up. The mass increases as well. But notice the density doesn't change. So that would remain the same. Now, this one, it says, what happened to the density of the wood block as the mass and the volume of the block were changed? Explain why this makes sense. So here's a little hint, right? As the mass and the volume of the wooden block changed, did the material of the block change? So are we actually changing what the material of this block is made out of? Good. Now, the next section asks you to calculate the density of each object and determine whether the material floats or sinks. So let's just do the wooden block because we already have that one out. So I can just go ahead and throw that in there. Well, it already has let's see here, if I reset it, it'll probably be easier to calculate. Well, actually, we're not even calculating it, right? You get the density up here, right? So the density here, now I know we've learned it in grams per milliliter, but kilograms per liter is the same thing as grams per milliliter. And I think I put that down here, right? I just wanted to make sure because those are the same things. So we know that it's going to be 0.4, and then I have to put the density, which is, well, grams per milliliter. Now notice it did not turn green because I have to get all three of these correct. And the last one's easy, whether it floats or sinks. Well, I just throw it in the water and it's going to be floating, right? So now I got that one correct. Good. So you do that with the rest of them. Now, the last one is a little bit tricky because what you're going to do is you're going to use that custom box down here. So this one you can change what the mass is and what the volume is. And what you want to do, you want to change it, and you want to figure out at what point does that block start to float? What's the density? What's that magic number? So you sort of have to play around with it, change that density, and you do have to figure out what density, what's that line determines whether an object floats or sinks in water. Now the next part, what you're going to do is you're going to come down here and click on that mystery. Now there are 3 sets, and we're going to do all 3. We're not going to do the random. You can get some practice on your own, but we're just going to do set 1 for now. So I'll go ahead and I'll do box 1A. Oop, there we go. Actually, I think, 1A. You know what? I will do 1B because it does float, and that is a tricky one. So we'll do 1B. So what I do is I come up here, and I need to find the mass. So I go ahead and I place it on that scale. So it says 0.4 kilograms. So I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to put, this is B, right? 0.4. And the unit, I know it says kilograms, but we're going to put it as grams. Now, the reason why we do that is because that little hint, right? Kilograms is the same thing as kilograms per liter is the same thing as grams per milliliter. We just haven't used kilograms per liter, but they're the same unit if you convert within the metric system. Now, the next one is the volume. So this one's tricky. This one we have to use water displacement. So I have 100 liters here. Now we're going to have to pretend it's milliliters, but notice when I put it in, it starts to displace it. Well, anything above that 100, that's going to be what the volume is. But notice it's not fully in the water. You have to make sure it's fully submerged, and you can drag it. So notice, well, it started at 100. I fully submerge it, and it's at 101 liters. We're just going to pretend they're milliliters because we want it in grams per milliliter. So then I come in here and I put, well, it went 1 over, right? 1 over that 100, and then I come and I put, milliliters, right? Because we're doing everything grams and milliliters. Then you can come over and you can calculate the density. So you use the calculator, right? So it's just density equals mass divided by volume. So I get 0.4 divided by 1. Well, that's an easy one, 0.4, right? So that's going to be 0.4. And the unit, well, we took grams divided by milliliters, grams per milliliter. Then you have to determine whether it floats or sinks. That one's fairly easy. You just throw them in there, right? So it's going to float. Now, the last one is we have to figure out what this box is made out of. So if you come up here, there's a little density table. So I know the density. It's 0.4 grams per milliliter. So I come up here and I just need to find the one that's 0.4. Well, notice that, well, it says wood. So I go and click wood. Notice it only turns green if you get the entire row correct. So that way you can make sure that if it doesn't turn green, you messed something up. Some of these, they're going to be long decimal points, round to the second decimal point, right? Because there's 2 decimal points here. That is what is going to get you that answer. There is one that's not exactly, but just look to the one that's the closest. So that's set 1. Then there's the set 2. So you come over here and you click set 2. Then come down here and then you do set 3. And then the last question says, well, what is the density of water? One of these materials is water. You know the density. Then you have to tell me, well, if an object has a density greater than water and is placed in water, what will it do? If an object has a density less than water and is placed in water, what will it do? So once again, this is the Phet density class activity.